And let's see. Okay. You are recording.
Great. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the January 28th, 2021 Mercer Island Arts Council special video meeting. I'm Erin Vivian, Chair of the Arts Council. In accordance with Proclamation 20-28.11 and the Governor's Extended Safe Start Order, tonight's meeting is using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The video of this meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel later this evening. City staff Sarah Bluvas, Council Liaison Salim Neese, and Consultant Emily Moon are participating in tonight's meeting remotely. Other public audience members may be listening to the meeting by telephone or via the internet. So welcome to all, and thank you for joining us tonight. Board members, please ensure that your microphones are turned on for the roll call. Sarah, will you please call roll?
Okay, Erin Vivian.
Here.
Amy Barnes.
Here.
Anu Meha.
Here.
Eric Gordon.
Here.
She is not here. Suzanne Scone.
Here.
And Gayleen Baden.
Here.
Great, thank you.
Great, we have quorum. Board members, I'd like to remind you that we would like you to use the raise hand feature on Zoom to ask questions. Since tonight's meeting is primarily a workshop / discussion, I've asked Sarah to keep her eye on the hands that are raised, and she'll recognize board members in the order in which hands are raised. Tonight's agenda will not include in-person public appearances in accordance with Proclamation 20-2811 and the Governor's Extended Safe Start Order. Since we didn't have any pre-registered appearance requests, we're going to move to the primary agenda item. So tonight's primary agenda item is to conduct the first workshop for arts reset planning, which is part of the city's overall effort to develop a reset plan for recreation, the Mercer Island Community and Events Center, and the arts. We're joined by consultant Emily Moon. Thank you for joining us, who will guide us through this first workshop with support from Sarah, the city's economic development coordinator. I welcome Sarah to introduce Emily, who will guide tonight's discussion.
Great, thank you, Erin, and thank you, Emily, for being here tonight to help kick us off with some arts reset planning. So I know we included some materials. We intended at the January 13th meeting to do a kickoff presentation and then lead into this workshop tonight, but the windstorms and power outages on the island had other plans. So hopefully you had a little bit of an opportunity to review the materials we provided ahead of time, including the video presentation that Emily recorded last week. But just to kind of reiterate and give you a reminder, the city obviously has been very impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially the Parks and Recreation Department, which, as you all may recall, the Arts Council falls under the purview of. We've had a lot of restrictions in terms of COVID-19 related guidelines, a lot of restrictions on services, programming, and rentals. And that really led to, kind of the situation we're in right now, needing to really reset our programming for recreation, our services at the community center, and also arts programming and Arts Council work. So our city leadership, really recognized the importance of these areas last year, and in late October, we assembled a staff team led by Emily, who's helped the city with some other services, and she will share a little bit more about kind of her background and experience. To really look at kind of what would it take to bring services back online foundationally, what are our essential services and programs, and how do we kind of get to an immediate action plan to start bringing things back for the community, but also a long-term plan for what these different areas will look like, post-pandemic and beyond. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and I'm excited to have you all in the room tonight. I think this will be a great discussion. I think that this, for better or for worse, we're kind of back in a situation we wanted to be this time last year when you were getting ready for your retreat planning, thinking about, what are the goals of the Arts Council? What are your primary assets? And where do you see yourself, kind of guiding the arts and culture realm within the community? So with that, Emily, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Very nice introduction. So I'm going to try to share my screen next, and then we will get started. And we'll certainly introduce myself, since I know we didn't have the opportunity to do some of that work when we had hoped to meet on the 13th. So I am a city manager type. I have worked in several communities across the country. And most recently, I was the city administrator in Issaquah. And a couple months, a year and a half ago, my family and I took a family sabbatical that had been long planned to go and travel the world and world school our then 5th grader before she got busy with middle school, and you know how life is. But COVID had other plans, so we got about 6 on the recreation community event center side of the house that are working on elements of their plans, which have some different dynamics than arts side of the house. And I've primarily been working with Sarah on the arts programs and services. So that's who I am. Our role as the Reset team is for immediate and for long-term for Arts Council and arts programming and services. And then it's your role as the advisory board to the City Council to review those recommendations, provide input, and lend your advice and your recommendations to the full City Council. So tonight we have a kind of packed agenda. We're going to get through what we can get through tonight and save topics for additional meetings if we need to. But my hope is we're going to review the current conditions and kind of near-term conditions as best we can fortune tell on that. And then we're going to talk briefly about the Arts Council's mission and goals. We're not going to refine those or redefine them in any way. You have wonderful foundation documents for all of that. But we're just going to make sure the memory is refreshed, and we're going to work with what you have already established. Furthermore, though, we're going to try to refine in the sense of identifying what the essential responsibilities are for the Arts Council. And in doing so, as we go along, I want to hear about your areas of interest and your top priorities as well. And that's important because we're going to try to develop our immediate action plan. And I'll define that in a little bit. It was defined on the video from the 13th as well. And I'll tell you what our hope is in terms of execution, getting something over to the City Council. And then if time allows, we're going to do some other stuff too. But I think we have a full agenda just with those first few bullet points. So I wanted to take just a quick minute and pause and ask if there were any questions so far about where we're going with this workshop, or anything based on the materials that would have been covered on the 13th. Everybody's ready? Jump right in? Okay, great. So I want to define in a big macro way what we're trying to do with a long-term reset plan. And I know I've tossed around two terms, immediate action plan and a long-term reset plan. The long-term reset plan is much of what Sarah was talking about in terms of how do we gear up and get ready for delivery of services into the future. So we're going to try through that to achieve a better understanding of what the essential functions are of the Arts Council, what's needed to sustain our achievement on those essential functions, and then how might we go about strategically aligning the resources that are needed to perform those functions. And then lastly, after we have done that really difficult work, I think, we can have some conversation about what can we do beyond that. There's always an interest to do more. There's always more community need and demand. And so I don't want to pretend that that's not out there either, but I want to be deliberate about trying to identify some criteria or thresholds that would need to be met in order for us to expand beyond this. We want to try to do what we need to do first and well before we think about expanding. So this work is about looking forward, about thinking how to retool what is the Arts Council to start creating the next suite of services, programs, activity, policy work, whatever it might be, in a way that has a very clear focus and one that is rooted in those essential functions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about current conditions, and at a moment in the near future, I'm going to pause and ask for you to contemplate and share, if you'd like, what you are able to do at this moment in time. All of us have been affected by the pandemic in different ways. And as a volunteer board and commission, your time and your efforts are essential resources for this group. And so I wanted to make sure that we do a little bit of sharing about your availability and how that might help us to understand what resources we have to put into play to deliver on the immediate action plan or even the long-term reset plan. So have that in mind, and I'm going to come back to it in a couple of slides. But first, I wanted to share that our current conditions, as Sarah spoke to at the very beginning, are constrained. When the city started to see what was coming in terms of the pandemic and how that was going to affect local economy and the municipal budget, the city council had to take quick action to make some decisions to cut back on services and programs and to reduce costs because revenue sources just weren't producing. Facilities were closed, many staff members were laid off. And so there is no operating budget this year for Arts Council or arts programs and activities. I think you're all aware of that from having watched some of your earlier meetings. There still is money in the 1% for Arts Fund, which is predominantly used for capital related expenses or ongoing maintenance to take care of the public art of the city. And Sarah is a very capable liaison to your council, and she will continue to be. But Sarah has also taken on some additional responsibilities during the pandemic, serving in an emergency operations capacity for the city, assisting small businesses in particular, and recently gained a new title and will have some additional responsibilities on behalf of the city to help grow its economic development, health. So her own time will also be constrained to some degree. So with all of that in mind, we want to be really thoughtful about what we take on in the near term and how we begin moving forward into the future. The timeline for this project is I would love for us to try to identify over the next month what we think our immediate action plan will be. And that immediate action plan is really targeting what can we do within 2021. The long-term reset plan is more focused on 2022 and beyond. Our goal is to get recommendations to the City Council in April. The reason for that is traditionally City Councils have looked at year-end financial data, maybe even some first quarter financial data by that time, and entertains some thoughts about what additional impacts there have been to the budget, what kind of adjustments need to be made, whether that's on the expenditure side, or if revenues are better than expected, then sometimes there's additional resources that City Council makes available to different departments or service areas, and there's an opportunity. So we want to be ready for that moment. We're going to be hopeful, and we want to be able to communicate to City Council what the game plan is, and then hopefully have them chime in with their input and perhaps provide some additional resources if additional resources are needed for that immediate action plan. So the pandemic is another current condition we cannot escape. Sarah talked about that a little bit. I talked about what happened last spring and the impacts, the macro impacts of that. This is a changing condition. Even as of 2:30 this afternoon, Governor made a new announcement that changes one of my slides. I did not go and make those fixes, but it's something that it's been very difficult for us to predict exactly what services and programs might be possible in any different, so much is tied to what is the rate of incidence of COVID-19, and that has ebbed and flowed. So what activities can be conducted, how those activities can be conducted, and so the pandemic remains an ongoing constraint for us and one that we have to monitor. So at this point, I wanted to ask Sarah if you can share, despite those constraints, what the Arts Council was able to do in 2020, and if you have any other thoughts about current conditions.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I tried really hard to do in my capacity supporting the local business community was to infuse arts and culture in some of the supports that we did. So the Arts Council was, kind of involved with some of the projects in the outdoor gallery. So some of the activations we did in Town Center, like with George Lee's new piece, Contrast Distance, which is currently on view, and a new project that's kind of coming out, I would say next week will be officially announced, that it's in the works with MyVol and the Mercer Island Chinese Association, a community arts project. So, a lot of thinking around how do we reactivate Town Center, knowing that people are staying home as they should to stay healthy, and then draw people back to our local businesses. So there's definitely opportunity. And really great ways that we can be creative. So I'm excited for this process because I think that this group can generate a lot more ideas than I could alone. But I just kind of encourage you in those thinking about those constraints, it doesn't have to be what it's always been. You know, it may not be, this year might not be the year that Mostly Music in the Park comes back, but it could be the year that the community reconnects with the public art collection individually. So I just, you know, even though we hear the words constraints and you know, lack of budget and that kind of thing, just keep in mind that throughout this process you have assets at your disposal. On the staff support side, as Emily mentioned, I'm still here. I am part of the Community Planning and Development Department now. I was appointed in the limited term Economic Development Coordinator position, primarily, you know, continuing a lot of the COVID related work that I did last year, but also moving forward a lot of economic development related projects that were included in the 21-22 city budget, as well as looking ahead for like comp plan amendments and some bigger picture opportunities. So, you know, I'm fortunate I get to still be your liaison. Our city manager wanted to kind of keep some continuity, knowing that our staff, you know, we have limited staff capacity. So it made sense to continue having me work with you all, which I'm excited about. But know that, of course, it's in a very different capacity than it was a year ago when you had kind of a full-time arts and culture coordinator.
Thank you, Sarah. So this is the current condition as we know it, sort of, probably as of 2 o'clock, not 2:30. There's a new plan. It has a new title, Healthy Washington, the Roadmap to Recovery. And it describes 2 phases, but that second phase doesn't return us back to normal. It still involves COVID being an issue and lower occupancy levels, limited activities, et cetera. So there's quite a bit of ambiguity about what comes after phase 2 in the prior to today, we would have needed to met 4 out of 4 of the metrics in that second bullet. And I understand from the governor's announcement today that counties only need to reach 3 of the 4, and then they can advance to phase 2. We're now in, I think you could call it 1.5 as of this afternoon, because the governor has said some additional activities that would have been permitted in phase 2 can now occur in King County. And in particular, I read that museums and say fitness centers, so think community center maybe, can open and can operate up to a maximum of 25% capacity. So we're still getting some information on that since that just changed today, but it looks to me that phase 2 is more of the applicable phase for work that you could think of being under the Arts Council umbrella. So gathering indoors or outdoors for those purposes. So at this point, I want to open up the discussion to Arts Council members. And this is where I'd love it if you feel willing to do so, to share a little bit about your own availability to do this kind of work. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you're hearing in the community. What do you think the arts community needs are right now in this moment when we're still wrestling with the pandemic, the community as a whole? And then if Member Nice has any thoughts on current needs of the city, then we can share those as well. So Madam Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Emily. That was awesome. So I just have a question about the phases, because I'm just reading something from our city saying that we will advance to phase 2 February 1st. Does that? does that change our planning perspective on the previous slide that you had up?
No,
No.
it doesn't, in that there are no plans for opening the community center, for example, on February 1st. So we are working with the recreation staff on their reset plan. And even though it may be permissible, the city doesn't have everything it would need in order to safely operate that facility, for example. And we're not flipping the light switch right away and doing a bunch of community program. We still are in that moment where we're doing the planning work to decide what we can safely provide.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Does anyone have thoughts or want to jump in to the discussion before I start talking?
I see a hand from Suzanne and then Gayleen.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear. You're saying there is no budget at all for 2021? And is there any budget at all for 2022? And also, what would be an expectation of staff time, either Sarah's time or Parks and Rec staff time? I mean, would we realistically say, 5 hours a week? Or, I mean, what are your thoughts? Am I clear about that budget issue, and what are expectations along staff support?
Yes, Sarah, I'm going to ask if you can jump in. My understanding is there's no operating budget for the Biennium, but that was partly a product of understanding that some of the work that the Art Council typically does, the programs and services it provides, would not be able to be provided, at least for some portion of 2021. And so I think the City Council and the City Manager are looking to us to put together a plan and say, what is it that we need and how do we want to use those resources? And then City Council can consider that. Sarah, you want to jump in on budget and also your time?
Can I quickly interject? Would it be okay if at this point we stop sharing the screen just to make it a better,
sure.
easier to like
Thank
connect when we're separate? I think it's easier to see
Absolutely.
people's faces. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so to piggyback on what Emily was saying, yes, currently there's no Arts Council operating budget. If you recall, the way your budget has worked in years past, you fell under the Parks and Recreation budget. So right now, no operating budget planned, but potentially, like Emily's saying, potentially the opportunity to go back to council to ask for funds for 21 or 22, depending on the plan that we kind of develop when going through what the essential services are, the essential functions, and what the needs of the community are from an arts perspective. Keep in mind that there are, granting opportunities outside of the general fund operating budget. Usually some of the funds allocated for your operating budget were already assumed as grants or sponsorships. That was like largely for mostly Music in the Park. That was primarily a grant and sponsorship funded program. So those grant funds weren't on top of your operating budget, but were a portion of it. But that's just something important to keep in mind because there are county and state and other entities that are still offering funding, especially for organizations that are shifting gears to support COVID-19 relief work for either artists and arts organizations or communities through using arts and culture. From a staff time perspective, my staff work plan is still being kind of worked out right now as we identify kind of the larger community planning and development work plan, but also specifically the economic development items for this year and next year. So I would say, certainly you can't rely on me for the same level of support that you're used to from me, but that's one of the things that we need to identify, kind of as this planning work unfolds. What resources, money, staff, or otherwise will it take to move forward what you all consider the essential functions and the essential programs and services? So that's, a long answer, but just to know that that's something that we kind of need to work out with you all based on the plan that we develop.
Okay, great.
I think Gayleen was next.
What I'm wondering is, and I know that the rules were just changed today, but whether someone is looking at the potential for having an outdoors art event that might even be revenue generating so that we could deliver some sort of programming.
Yeah, again, I would say that's something that you would probably evaluate through this planning process. Currently, my understanding is that there's no community plans for special events or anything like that. I think it's part of the conversation on the recreation reset planning side, but I don't think anything has been, fully confirmed. There is my understanding from the Chamber of Commerce, and maybe Suzanne can chime in about this. There's possibly still potential to offer Art Uncorked this year, but maybe not. So, that's a large scale arts event that was a revenue generator for the Chamber, but we may not get to the point where we're able to offer those types of programs this year.
Anyone else have anything? Okay, well, I'll just jump in with a couple of things. I just wanted to add in some of the things that I did during the pandemic, which while Sarah was busy with the small businesses, I jumped into numerous coalitions that were forming, organizations that were forming to help support the arts. The arts community in our region has been devastated. And I mean, I can't impress enough how severe the situation is. A lot of them will not recover from this. A lot of them are hanging on by a thread. And we're a group that is here to try to help support the arts. So I think it's important as we move forward to understand sort of our position in the region and to understand how we're reacting to this emergency for the arts communities as opposed to how some of our neighbors are. I just think that's an important point to keep in mind. And also, this might be a question partly for Salim, and to understand why our organization is put on such pause instead of like, how can we help support the Arts Council so that we can help support the arts community? We are told and have been told for nearly a year that we can't do anything. We can't do this. We can't support your efforts to help people. Over this past year, I've probably had more requests from the community for help with arts projects than I've had in previous years, and have had to say no, 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 over and over again. We can't help you. But we're the Arts Council. We're here, we're supposed to be helping support the community. So how can we get back to a place where we're doing that? I mean, so this isn't about like what's our budget so we can do Arts Council. Like, how can we help these artists in our community, and especially our community, which supports young artists and what they're going through? How can we get to a point where we are helping them? Why don't we have at least a little bit of budget to grant out to these struggling artists? These are the sort of questions that are coming to mind.
Yeah, so Chair, I think this is exactly the kind of input that we want from you. If this ends up being something that the Arts Council feels very strongly about, that the immediate action plan needs to be some way of supporting the arts community, then we'll package that up and we'll take that to City Council and we'll say, this is what we think we need to do as the Arts Council in the short term, immediately. So right now, while there's no operating budget, that operating budget in the past had been used to fund programs and services that by and large could not be delivered during this time because of the constraints. But the work that we're doing right now is to develop that response plan to the pandemic and to take that to the City Council and help them understand what the arts community is needing right now. So that's part of tonight's discussion. But I think the City Council have some very tough choices to make to reduce the budget such that the public safety interests, for example, of the city could be maintained during the pandemic. So it really had to shift gears and make sure the resources were going into keeping Mercer Island safe.
Yeah, I'd love to have like a large conversation around what makes our community so different than our neighbors. Sarah and I both attended a For Culture meeting this morning where there was a round robin basically of all the LAAs and what they've been doing and how they've been impacted. And I don't think anyone that spoke had the impacts that we did on Mercer Island. And is it a fundamental difference in how this community values the arts? Do we need to like get down to that discussion and really define what our community thinks is the arts? Just you know, an add-on, nice to have, or do we see the arts as essential to a healthy community? And how can we support that here, just like everyone else is in the region?
Can I pop in on Erin's comment? I think we have some really good data that came out of this survey that was done by Mercer Island Parks and Rec. I think it was issued March 31st of 2020. And I mean, residents really, really value arts and culture on Mercer Island. And I would use that as a information document to talk about what work probably needs to be done. And they also seem very satisfied and very desirable of the programs that the Arts Council was doing, you know, Shakespeare in the Park, music in the park, very, very favorable survey responses to those programs. And so I guess my interest would be looking at what can we take from those experiences and make it safe, pandemic possible, you know, just saying the phase that, say, if we never get past the phase that we're moving into in the next few days, if that's the phase we're in, maybe we'll get better, but maybe we'll drop back down in the next year, you know, back and forth, back and forth. But being very conservative, what can we bring our residents that they already loved what we had before? To me, now they're super hungry for that. And that's what I'm hearing. The youth, they are, I mean, mental health for the youth, I think, is extremely important. So, and whether that's art contests that they can do at home, and then we do some kind of easel development in Mercerdale Park that you can just walk around the loop there on the track by yourself and look at the arts. Nothing parents love doing more than looking at their kids' art with their families and other families. But so I think, I mean, personally, I think our community, I think we want to support the artists, to your point, Erin, but I think we want to support our community members that, gosh, I feel like we're really selling them out. I feel like, aren't we better than this? I
Yeah,
mean, can't we
I
do
think they're
better?
inseparable. I think supporting our artists are helping, that's supporting the community at the same time.
And I don't want to take up more of my time, but I need to know the answer to this too. Celine, maybe you can tell me or tell us, where are we with Link Light Rail and those plazas that are, I mean, where are we? Can we, is that an area we need to explore? Our sculpture garden, our outdoor sculpture garden, our plazas that are coming with Link Light Rail? Because it seems to me now's the, you've got this volunteer capital that's on this Zoom call right now, and we don't have any money or staff. Should we be doing some planning around this?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So let's take them kind of separate.
Welcome back. Welcome back, Salim.
Yeah.
You're on the hot seat now. You have lots of
Yeah,
questions.
it's fine. I want to start with what Aaron said, because I think that when you go to a regional meeting and you talk to other regional groups, whether it be other arts councils or it could be other recreation departments, other planning departments, everybody's had their own experience with COVID. Mercer Island went into COVID coming off the heels of a failed Prop 1. And from a budgetary perspective, we knew we had a structural imbalance. We knew that we had a large deficit. And then the council was already in kind of cutting and trimming posture. When we had gone from one city manager to a new city manager, we had some attrition and turnover in the leadership team, and COVID hit. Mercer Island was very quick to react to COVID, quicker than any other city in the region. And the cuts that we took were deep, were fast, and they were really significant cuts to made. The timing was February, March when we made the first rounds of cuts. And the first thing that went was Park and Rec. And Park and Rec went because February was the time of the year where Sarah and other rec directors were lining everything up for summer programs. Everybody was getting hired. You were building your programs out. Everybody had paid for them. You knew what you were going to have revenue wise. And we put a halt to that. We put a halt to everything that was going to be discretionary through the summer. And not only because we eliminated a number of staff positions, but because everybody that was left moved to the EOC. And Mercer Island has a very robust EOC that was not just working for Mercer Island, but was doing some things regionally, trying to get PPP for first responders. We were converting potentially the community center to a quarantine facility for our firefighters. There was a lot of stuff that was going on that was first of its kind. I mean, nobody thought that, I don't know if anybody remembers, but when the pandemic broke out, there was a firehouse in Bothell that had COVID run through it, or it might have even just been, every city was scrambling to find where are we going to quarantine our firefighters? They can't go home to their families. They can't stay in the station. We're going to have to find another place. There was a lot of that kind of planning that was going on. And in and among it, the city was saying, we don't even have the resources to look at anything discretionary, be it arts programming, recreation programming, park programming. And we hauled in all our trash cans so we didn't have people emptying trash, closed all the parks, closed all the playgrounds, nothing, no maintenance anywhere, just shut it down. So it was drastic. I was in meetings yesterday. I've been in meetings all week, talking to Tequila, talking to Issaquah, Sammamish. They're all looking at Mercer Island and saying, boy, what you did was hard and what you did was early and it was fast. We're having to deal with it now. And I think that if you come back a year from now, the people that you're talking to that say, well, no, our budget wasn't cut and we didn't suffer that, they're going to have a very different story to tell in 12 months. I promise you that. Where we are is we're in the enviable position of being able to take a breath, plan, allocate some resources, and pull out of this, right? So we shouldn't look at it as, what was taken off our plate and how do we get it back as quickly as possible? We should say, well, we are free of planning right at the moment. We don't have to line up artists for music in the park. We don't have to line up any schedules for Shakespeare in the park. We have a clean slate. Nobody has to do anything, but we can be thoughtful about what would we do if we clawed back the resources we lost, added it to maybe another year's of budget, and then tried to be on the bleeding edge of bringing back arts in a meaningful way that isn't gifting public funds. We can't just take money and start handing it out to artists because it's illegal. So we can hire artists, we can do things for artists, but we can't just take taxpayers' dollars and give it to artists. There's rules against that. We can develop programs that can try and spur activities that are financially beneficial for artists, we can hire artists, but we can't just give money to artists. So one thing I'll do is when I get off here, I'm just going to walk down the hall and grab a budget, and I'll confirm what is or isn't in the next biennial budget. So 21 and 22. I can tell, Aaron, you're a little vexed by what I said about just the gifting of public funds.
We've
So
historically had a granting program from the Arts Council for all the years before I joined, and up until maybe 2 years ago. So maybe we're misunderstanding what we're not gifting for granting.
No, you're still entering into a contract for service. They express what they're going to do with that money. So that's the difference. All right, if I might, I think I'm gonna go on so that we can try to get to our exercise tonight. We have a lot more conversation that needs to be had. I can see that that's the case. I wish that we had the meeting on the 13th, because I think we could have talked about these circumstances. I know all of you are just learning some of this and trying to process it. We will do that as we go. I also want to acknowledge that Councilmember talked about wanting to really attend to the social and cultural needs of the community, and that we also know how valued that is in Mercer Island, and that's absolutely true. And the Parks and Rec survey that she mentioned that was completed before the pandemic hit does provide some valuable information about what people enjoyed. The issue that I've been talking to our Parks and Rec staff about is that survey is designed to ask, what do you like and what do you want more of? Well, once the pandemic hit, the question needed to change a little bit. The question needed to be more along the lines of what can you live without? What can you not live without? About choices. And so that survey does give us great information, but the exercise that we need to go through now is a little bit different. It's not about additive action. It's about really focusing in on exactly what the community needs, or exactly what the Arts Council role needs to be. So I know this is challenging work, but that's our goal, is to try to get really focused and then to go and ask for the resources to make that happen.
Really quickly,
Okay,
Gayleen, I see, Gayleen, you have a hand up. Do you have a question or a quick
I
comment?
just want to mention really quickly, and Aaron alluded to this earlier, this is not a no-sum game. There are plenty of grants out there for arts activities, and if we have no resources to be able to pursue those grants, then we're losing that opportunity, not because it doesn't exist, but because we've decided not to take advantage of it.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna share my screen again. How we doing? Everybody can see? Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna fly through a few of these so that we can get to our exercise. All of you received in your packet a bunch of background information. As I said earlier, you have some wonderful foundational documents. The ordinance is your primary governing document. That's what gave the Arts Council life. That's the creation document. And your primary role under that is to act in an advisory capacity to the City Council. Your bylaws are the place where your mission is stated, and that's to nurture, promote, support quality cultural arts activities. And you have goals listed abundantly. They are expressed in numerous bullet points and well-written narrative in the comp plan. And all of those are still relevant. And as I said, we're not working to change those in any ways. What they boil down to is the Arts Council not only advising City Council, but working to advocate, stimulate, promote, and support. Those are like the main verbs that I see. So our challenge is to try to make sure that we're attending to the primary purpose of the Arts Council and to make sure that our resources are focused on that so that we can perform those essential functions. There's no other entity on the island that performs the essential functions of the Arts Council. So our goal is to try to make sure that we're transitioning the Arts Council into being a very strategic entity. You have big vision and goals, and we want to make sure we're also being very strategic. So there's 10 responsibilities spelled out in the Arts Council ordinance. I'll say 5 of them are really well defined. They're the sort of thing where you can look at it and you can check the box, yes or no. And then 5 are a bit open-ended. It leaves it up to the Art Council to decide how to execute on that particular responsibility. And because of that open-endedness, the question really becomes, what is it we must do in order to satisfy, in particular, those 5 open-ended pieces? What are we required to do? What minimally will get us to a place where we can even check the box on those 5 that are less well-defined? What are the foundational tasks that support our achievement of those responsibilities? So in a nutshell, that's about defining what is core. And I'm using this definition, very governmental one that is used often, that core services are those that the municipality is required or compelled to perform. And those are often the services that no one else delivers. And it's really easy to think about these when you're thinking about a water department or a fire department or a police department. It's much harder when you think about other kinds of services and program areas of the city. And so we're going to break it down into 3 buckets to try to help us to define what is core and what is essential. So the first I'm labeling essential or required, and those are the ones that are described by the ordinance. Those are your primary responsibilities that were given to the Arts Council by the City Council. Then the next level is what I'm calling foundationally supportive. And those are the next tasks and responsibilities, activities that are undertaken that support fulfillment of the mission, that are necessary in order to really achieve your top priority outcomes. And because you have a responsibility under the ordinance to help maintain the public art collection, these are also the tasks that are necessary to maintain those assets of the city. And then the last is not core, it's not essential, but it's really important. It's really important. And that's what's desirable, what will help us to fulfill our mission, what can we do that is responsive to the community demand. And oftentimes this bucket causes us to stretch our mission a little bit, be a little bit more expansive. So I suspect for some of you, this might be harder to see. I saw Eric just lean in. All right. I have 2 of these tables. I'm going to show you half at a time because otherwise it really would be too small. And we're going to have a conversation about how to sort the various responsibilities, activities, tasks of the Arts Council into those 3 buckets. And so I'm going to walk you through what's on screen. We have a service or program category. You saw these with some minor changes that Sarah and I made after the packet went out, listed in your materials for tonight. And then the next column, I've tried to indicate where those activities or responsibilities are spelled out in the ordinance. So this is taken verbatim in those instances from the ordinance. And then the next column is where I've tried to define whether or not that responsibility is the kind of check the box one, and it's fairly easy to understand what has to be done in order to satisfy that. And then in other places where it's kind of open-ended, and so that's where you'll see some of the sub bullets. Question or number 5 is an example of that. And then I want us to think about, are there other entities that are already doing this work or could do this work? Because that might also help us think about what is essential for the Arts Council. And then the last is, let's try to see if we can put these into those 3 buckets that I talked about. I've given those that are listed in the ordinance the label of essential, because that's what they are. That's your charge from the City Council. To get into active mode on the presentation and see if I can take notes right on the table. So we're going to go line by line and have a little bit of conversation about each of these activities. So the first is develop and update the Arts Council and Culture Plan as a component of the city's comprehensive plan. I've defined that, but are there any questions on that? This is spelled out in the ordinance. It's an essential function. I don't think there's anyone else that has the primary responsibility of updating that part of the comprehensive plan. Anybody have any questions or concerns with how that one is labeled? No? Okay. Then the second one is develop, upkeep, advise City Council of Arts Council policies, procedures, and other plans. And that, to me, that one is inherent in the ordinance, but it's not specific in the ordinance. Actually, I think this label dropped off. I think this one is from the ordinance. Nobody has any questions about that though, right? Okay, let's go to 3. 3 says Arts Council governance, and we've given everything that makes the council run. It's the meetings, it's the kind of administrative functions, but it also includes activities like board recruitment. When there's a vacancy on the board, we often turn to board at vacancy, or to help inform community members so that they know what the Arts Council does, and to sort of groom them to see if they can step up at some point in the future and fill those slots. And then there's some maintenance activities for the board, like reporting volunteer hours. So I'm saying that's kind of inherent in the ordinance, that's part of the charge to the Arts Council. And so we've listed that one as essential as well. Number 4 is provide a forum for the community to express their views on arts and culture. That also is listed in the ordinance verbatim, but it's more open-ended. There's no discussion in the ordinance about how the Arts Council performs that service. So I wanted to hear you on this one. I have a question mark in that column about whether or not there are other entities on the island or regionally that provide that same sort of forum for community members to express their views on arts and culture. Anyone want to weigh in on that? Are you the only group that does it, or is there another forum?
I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll chime in. I know that from a regional perspective, there's a variety of organizations like For Culture at the county level, nonprofits like Arts Fund that really kind of amplify the opportunity to talk about arts and culture. As well as Inspire Washington, which is, a statewide organization really working on the legislative side. So those are just some of the bigger picture ones that community members could go to discuss their views.
And I think, Gayleen, I think you had your hand up.
Okay, I just muted myself, so unmuted myself. Oh well. Um, I don't I don't feel like having the ability to go to something on a regional basis or something at an individual school board, for example, it is the same as being able to go to something that represents our community. I don't think there is another organization that actually serves the function that we do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Part of this is you all are educating me as well. I know there are other groups that participate in arts and culture on the island, and perhaps they have forums of this nature, perhaps they don't. So anyone else want to weigh on that one? Or I'll go to 5.
I'll just weigh in really quickly. I think that one of the main, so our comp plan that we adopted 2 years ago, had like basically 2 main goals. And one was to help create more venues and more space for the arts on the island. And the second one was to create a more cohesive and coordinated environment for organizations on the island. So I think that as far as oh, sorry, maybe I was moving on to number 5. I feel like 4 and 5 are very similar. I think that, sorry, maybe I'm moving on to 5, but that has been something we've been striving to do, and something that has been iterated by community members is that a lot of our arts organizations on Mercer Island get really siloed, and there's really has been a need for a more central body. And we were working towards that. We created a liaison from the Fine Arts Advisory Commission, and we had one from MyVol. So we were working towards doing that.
Great, thank you. Yes, so number 5 is not just about being the forum to express views, but being a body that promotes, develops, stimulates, and encourages arts organizations, artists, and arts participation in the city. And so I'm hearing, as Erin expressed, that that's been it's not only in the ordinance, but it's been a goal, and you have developed some actions and thoughts about how to complete that. So that helps to fill in the blanks that are left in the ordinance about how. So you are trying to define how you would satisfy that ordinance responsibility. Okay, great. All right, here's where it gets tough. So we created some sub bullets because, again, the how isn't expressly described in the ordinance, and we wrote down some of those activities under the umbrella of number 5. So 5A is build awareness of and partnership for the Arts Council and Arts Council programs. And I wanted to ask you, are you, so it's not compelled per se under the ordinance, and there's no explanation of how well or how much of that has to be performed, therefore. And there's no other entity that can do it because you are the Arts Council. But what are your thoughts on which bucket it would go into? Do you feel like that is fundamentally part of your essential services? Is it foundationally supportive, or is it desirable?
I mean, I'll just jump in. If we're not doing anything, why do we need to promote ourselves? I mean, it's kind of like if we have some function and some space to serve, then yeah, but if we're not functioning, then it's not really
Yeah, I'll
It's
turn
not
that
really
around.
relevant.
Yeah, I'll turn that around and I'll say, why offer anything if you're not going to promote it?
Well, we did. When we had things to offer, we did promote them. And
Yeah.
so
Okay. Okay. So, according to our definition, we have any nominations to make that either essential or foundationally supportive? We need to go back to our definition too. I'll make a nomination.
I would say foundationally supportive for the reason that you kind of outlined, Emily, that, you know, when we did offer programming, we needed to promote it and build partnerships around it.
Yep.
So if programs were one of our core services, the promotion and partnership aspect were important.
Right, and this is a level below that of saying, okay, once we know we're supposed to promote, develop, stimulate, encourage arts organizations, and we're going to do that through our programs and service. Now we need to promote those programs and service. So I would agree, it's a second tier activity, still important, foundationally supportive. Okay, how about conducting outreach to the public to promote arts and culture or events? And that would include events that aren't city events or arts council sponsored events. Do you feel that it is essential or foundationally supportive or just desirable to conduct outreach to the public to promote events or arts activities in the city? Yes.
So I'm gonna chime in here just really quickly and say that it sounds like the group is being pretty quiet. And I know that everybody has opinions on this stuff. So I'm really just, you know, like, is there something right now that you all are getting hung up on, not being able to kind of express, you know, your opinions one way or the other? Because part of I would say your role as the Arts Council is really kind of guiding us and helping us determine what, if we only have limited resources and limited staff, how do we bring things back? How do we make sure that the Arts Council is continuing to provide services to the community? So I just wanted, you know, you all are always pretty open and have a lot of great ideas. So I'm just curious to know if there's something that's in the way right now.
Galen has a thought.
Sarah, I think.
Sorry, I feel like I keep jumping in, but I would personally would like the ability to take these sheets and think about them for a while. I feel like I'm being forced to make decisions that are really important that I don't have time to really contemplate, and I don't like going through these one by one. I'd like to look at them all holistically and kind of weigh them and see how they relate to each other and make decisions that way. So I guess the process for me is not encouraging me to make a decision, because I'm not sure it's going to be one that once I get through the whole list, I'm going to still feel is the correct decision.
Okay, thank you for that. I know this is challenging. This is not going to put anything in stone. We were going to be able to revisit this, but as I said, these items were listed in a pretty similar fashion on the meeting materials. And our goal tonight is to try to have a tough conversation about how to focus resources and how to think about what needs to come first as we try to start up some programs or services or be responsive to current conditions and the need of the community. Anumeha, I think you had your hand up some time ago. You have a comment?
Yeah, so I was thinking like this is not an essential item, given that we have limited resources. So my vote was going to be, you know, just desirable if it's possible, but not essential.
Well, I was going to actually disagree with that. Outreach and promoting arts and culture is actually one of our like defining most essential. I mean, that's who we are and what we're meant to do. So I don't understand why that would not be essential.
This one is for 5B, where it's like for including non-arts council activities. So if it's just to promote us, I think our just promoting us is probably not the right thing, but you know, if we could help artists and the community by doing very targeted outreach, that would be more beneficial. Again, that's just my opinion, and happy to, you know, be contradicted.
And I think, you know, part of the question is the Arts Council the place that's the clearinghouse to communicate and promote all things arts and culture in the community? I think that's kind of what
I mean,
this
we've
line is
talked about
asking.
that in the past many times, and that was our absolute goal, is to be that. I mean, we'd even talked about creating spots on our webpage to help promote and advertise what was going on in the community. I mean, that's why we exist, is to be a cohesive central place to help promote the arts.
Okay, thank you.
At least
Amy,
that
did you have your hand up?
Yes, please. 5A seems to me to be just innate to anything that we do. Why would we do any task if we're not going to promote it? So that seems to me to be, how could that be pulled off as a separate thing and not be essential at all for anything that we do? If we do any kind of programming. 5C, for example, makes a little bit more sense to me to pull out, because that's a very specific thing. It's a very specific thing. But 5A is just innate in any work that we do.
Yeah, 5A, yes, but aren't we talking about 5B? Sorry, I might be confused.
No, I backed up. I thought we were okay with 5B. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other comments on 5B? And then I'm going to move to 5C. I think we have mixed opinion on 5B, and that's okay. I think part of it is how we're going to define that. If it's Arts Council activities or all activities of the community. And I still heard.
Okay, so just to go back to that, I mean, we did extensive analysis on exactly that issue back when we were forming the comp plan, and talked to many organizations about that. And that became one of our central goals, is to become a place for promoting all of the organizations and being more cooperative amongst all our arts organizations on the island. So
that's great.
I don't.
That's great.
I mean, it's in the comp plan, so I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5A and 5B are kind of confusing. It looks like they're both saying the same thing, but like using different words. So it would be good to like clarify what is the difference between 5A and 5B.
I think 5B is broader. It's about all arts and culture and related events in the community. And 5A is more narrow. It's just Arts Council programs, activities, things that you would directly sponsor. Erin, what I would say to that is thank you for sharing that has been part of the conversation. And I absolutely have seen this in your goals. As you said, it's in the comp plan. The comp plan spells out a lot of goals. We're having this conversation because we want to try to see if we have some agreement on what are the top priorities. We can't tackle everything that's listed in the comp plan. So we're going to try to focus on hearing from everybody. What are the top priorities? What do they think are just absolutely essential for the Arts Council to do? So thank you for sharing that. Okay, how about 5C? 5C says explore establishing a creative district. So this is not explicitly mentioned in the ordinance. That's why that column's blank. And I believe that the city was going to be kind of the convener, the catalyst, the organizer for that effort. But I know that creating a district requires other partners. And is there, under state law, it's possible for another entity to be that convener, to play that role. But I don't know that you have anyone on island that would or could. So that's why I have a question mark there. And then I would ask, do you think this is an essential or a foundationally supportive or a desired responsibility of the Arts Council?
I see Galen has a hand up.
So we spent, I don't know, 6 months or so exploring establishing a creative district, and we tabled this before COVID ever happened and decided that the city wasn't ready for it yet. So I think that we would say it's desirable, but not anything that we need to do right now.
Okay, thank you. Any other opinions on that one? Or thoughts?
I agree with Galen. I agree with Galen.
Okay. Not seeing any other hands. I'm going to go to 5D. Produce and maintain Mercer Island's artist directory and other resource tools. Again, I'm not sure there's another entity that can or is producing anything like that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on which bucket we should place this one in.
So Emily, I have a question. As we're going through these, I'm just noticing that there are certain things that are really broad statements that really are like, they speak to the foundational principles of why our community created an arts council in 1985. Like building awareness and promoting and supporting, leading efforts to grow recognition and support the arts. Whereas these other things like creative district and arts directory are more things that speak to how the tools we use to do those things. So I don't quite understand why they're all like listed sort of on the same level, like A, B, C, D, E, and F are me. So some are principles, and some are like actual like programs and working objectives. So
right. So all of these have been expressed in the ordinance or in your bylaws or in the comp plan or in your work plan for, say, the last couple of years as goals or specific activities that the arts, where they're broader and they're more goal statements or more vision statements, the how is left open. And so if we're going to decide from going through these conversations where we're going to put our time, our energy, our money, we have to look at both. Is it the goal that is really important, and therefore we're going to figure out a how that fits within the constraints or that is strategic to really get us to the outcome we're seeking under that goal? Or is that specific activity so important to us, that really finite task, that that's where we're going to put our resources? So I think it is challenging because we do have them. They are on different levels, but they're all represented here in this list. And that's because the Art Council at one point or time has said all of these are important. And they may all be important, but the task at hand is to try to figure out which are the top priorities and which are the ones that we are going to put our resources toward.
Okay. I think this as redefining the like main mission of the Arts Council. And I feel like we're doing that a little bit in deciding whether or not promoting arts or supporting the arts on Mercer Island is essential or non-essential. I just don't think that should even be part of the question, right? We need to be talking about which services that we used to provide or would like to provide are essential right now during the pandemic, not like deciding whether our principles still matter. That's what I'm having trouble conceptualizing why.
I understand. I understand. So at the beginning, I said we're not rewriting goals, we're not rewriting mission statement, bylaws, we're not rewriting the ordinance. Those things are still in place. We don't foresee for the next few years that you're going to be able to get back to doing everything that you were doing before. So you may have a comp plan that a typical life for a comp plan is 6 years. You may have elements in your comp plan that remain at that goal and vision level for a few years. We're trying to decide what's most important for us in the immediate, which is probably through the end of 2021, and then thinking about the next, say, couple of years. That's what we're putting as a time frame really for the long-term action plan. And the city is not going to be able to tackle every single one of these. So we really need to think about if those goals are still essential and all I've done is label the things that are in the ordinance as that, which are the activities that we really want to pursue. And we can pull out items on this list that you think, instead of going line by line, we can start to talk about a specific item, better define it, talk about whether that's an immediate action plan item or whether
I think it would be a really like better use of our volunteers' times to like get to the more meat of the issues without having to go line by line. I mean, I think one
okay.
like overall problem we have right now is resources, right? It's money and time. And I know at some point in the past 2 to 3 years, I think it was the city, I'm not really sure because I know at the city revised the code without consulting with the Arts Council and like cut our numbers. And at some point our Arts Council went from a working commission to an advisory commission. Historically, from my understanding, it's always been a working commission. And, that's fine, we're advisory as well. But one of the main assets of the Arts Council has always been its volunteers. And they committed when they joined to donate a certain amount of hours to all these working objectives. And that's how the Arts Council has been run historically. I get that has changed, but what I'm seeing is right now, a lot of people having a hard time donating their time with everything that's going on. So if we want to actually offer our services or our support to the public, we need, first of all, volunteers. So maybe we should start talking about how we can retain volunteers or how we can bring more on to the board. I've had a very challenging time trying to get people to apply to our Arts Council right now, and discussions of why and how we can change that might be a helpful first step. I mean, I don't want to hijack this process, but I'm getting a sense from a lot of our members that it's maybe there could be a different way we could approach this.
Why don't we go to a slide where we talk about some more open-ended questions and see if that is helpful for us. I think there's still some work that needs to be done to get really explicit about how we're going to use resources. And Erin, your point about advisory or working is really important. I think what we're not going to go back in time. The city really has two types of boards and commissions. They have one that's regulatory. It's responsible for writing and implementing laws and making decisions that can be adjudicated. And then it has other boards that are advisory to the city council. Those are the two types of boards. Each of those may have working groups that help to carry out the work of the boards and commissions. And I know the Arts Council has done that. And so I know volunteers are really important to your efforts. And so we can talk about that, but we need to talk about what will those volunteers do. So let me skip over this.
Okay, I think Suzanne has a hand. Suzanne has a hand up.
Well, I mean, I'm actually struggling with the process. Usually I'm not that quiet, but I mean, I feel like maybe another way of looking at this is we're starting from zero. What is reasonable for us to do in a COVID environment that is essential? Like I see down the list is maintain the Retta Hackett Sculpture Garden. I mean, that is essential. We are not going to let our public resources degrade. Maybe we could say what is essential in this environment, and then what is our first priority as we move back into having a budget. I mean, is that another way of accomplishing what you're trying to do with that chart? I just don't, I'm not tracking on the chart. I don't know if others are, I'm guessing by the quietness that others are struggling with it. I mean, would that accomplish what we're trying to do here, or?
I think in part, I think we're, so we went through a similar sort of exercise with the Parks and Rec Commission, and there's two levels of questions. There's what is it we want to do that fits within the constraints in the near term, and we can have that conversation for the remainder of our time tonight. And then there's a bigger question. What are we going to do after that when perhaps we're not living with the same sort of constraints under COVID, like who can gather where and how, for how long, but we're still going to be living with the constraints of budget and others, whether that's the volunteer resource
And that's
constraints.
I think that's what I'm agreeing with you 100% what you just said. So let's say what is essential in the COVID time for the 2021 year, and what is our highest priority as we come out. And as council will address those priorities as they feel the value of that priority rises and their budget rises, and they will decide what's valuable. But we will say, this is our wish list, starting from the highest to the lowest. And they will do that balancing act of saying, well, we can give you one of those things, or we can give you two of those things because we're dealing with the other side, the budget side. I don't know. That's what makes sense to me. I'm just not, I don't know.
Yep, that sounds good. That sounds good. I'm trying to also make sure that we are being very strategic and thinking about these services in terms of priority, but in a sense of what is it that Arts Council needs to be responsible for. So let's do that. Let's talk about immediate. So I had a slide earlier about what the arts community and the community as a whole might need relative to what the Arts Council is responsible for or could deliver during the pandemic. So thinking about through the end of 2021, All the data says that probably won't have everybody vaccinated until summer or fall. And Parks and Rec, the recreation side of the house, for example, felt that it wanted to do one thing and do one thing well, and that's offer summer camps, but do it in a different way than has been done in the past, one that's flexible with COVID restrictions, utilizes outside contractors so the city doesn't have to hire additional staff. So they've made that one task their priority, and they're going to try to do it within all of the COVID constraints. So that's an example, and that was in your packet from the 13th of what we're looking for. Not a laundry list of things, but one thing that you could focus on, or two things that you could focus on and do well. So thoughts about immediate action plan. How do you want to use resources in this year, given those constraints?
Resources as in volunteer time?
Resources in your staff time, in any budget that you might be afforded, and your volunteer time, your board member time, other volunteers that you may need to partner with.
I see Eric and then Celine.
I guess I'm struggling with this. The fact, without any kind of working budget, how do we propose something? We have no guidelines, right? There's no guardrail on what we could potentially propose or do. So how do our resources are the volunteer time, and that's really it, and staff time. And I brought this up before, and I wanted to bring it up again, and maybe it's now that Salim's on the call. We have this 1% for the arts fund. I see this as a rainy day emergency. Whereas, if there's a financial impact, other industries find ways to maybe borrow or use money that was maybe initially allocated for something else. But I find it hard for us to come up with some kind of programming without any kind of money or any kind of guidelines. And I guess I bring it up again, is the 1% of the arts, is that even something? I know a lot of people didn't want to tap into it before, but I mean, that is money for the arts. Why not seriously consider that, even if it's something small that we could plan around?
So Eric, let me jump in for a second. The Arts Fund has verbiage in city's municipal code that does restrict it. So we can look at what's allowed, but it's primarily a source for capital funding, maintenance of.
I was told that
yeah.
the council could override that, and they could allow us to use it for something else. And I would think a 100-year pandemic might be something that we might be able to at least consider allocating those funds.
Eric's right about that.
Yeah, so all I'm saying is it would
Emily.
require a change to the ordinance and some other legwork. And then your other point was you were having a hard time understanding what activities could be done. And I think Sarah gave some examples of what was done during the pandemic with some resource constraints. And I think Aaron was talking about some examples at the beginning, that there's participation in coalitions, regional coalitions, that doesn't require more than time. There's other activities like convening the arts groups in the community and having a conversation about what is needed. Maybe you need to do that first before you can go to council and ask for something else. So I think there are activities that require a limited amount of resources and could help the Arts Council to get one step closer to meeting community need during the pandemic. Did that help?
Yeah, maybe a little bit, sure. I still think it's gonna, I see that where are they going to find the money? So if we come up with something great that may, we meet with the community, we talk to them, we can't tell them any kind of a budget or what might be possible. We come up with a great idea, we get the community excited about it. We go to the council and say, we want to do this event. It's not a lot of money. The council says at that point, well, sorry, we can't do it. No, now we just got the community involved and excited, and then now we have to let them down that we couldn't do it. So, what's feasible? What could we do? Is it a small event with that costs, everything costs money. So, setting up some easels at the park and having people paint and walking around and enjoy public art, that costs, it all costs money. So I would hate to, it's hard to get the community, engaged and excited about something. And then, especially when you don't say, I don't even know if it's possible, yeah, that's great. We want to do it. We'll present it to the city. And then, well, there's no budget in the city for them to, to allow that. Or I don't know. I'm still struggling with it a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I think there's a right way to go about formulating those ideas and soliciting community input and interest, and then going in and asking, giving options to the council and seeking their response. I'd also say there are other activities that don't require money. There's working on policies and procedures with regard to the Arts Council's work. So I think there's opportunities, and I think that the goal is just to try to figure out what is going to advance Arts Council priorities and goals, and then develop options. I think if you go into the city council with limited flexibility, that might not be the best approach.
I think Salim had his hand up for a while.
So I've been looking at the budget while you've been talking, and I think that maybe it is maybe poorly understood what the council did. The council took the elevator and put it on the ground floor and said, for these discretionary programs, we're just going to budget nothing. And as the biennium progresses, we're going to take prior year surplus funds and start to rebudget things based on these processes. What Emily is trying to build is the restart program. And I think that we're getting hung up on the lack of budgeted funds, like that's unique, but it's not. Like when I look at Park and Rec, the budget, the operating and expenditures in 19, so pre-pandemic, were 2.94 million. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, and like I said, we had those cuts that we made immediately to Park and Rec programs that were just getting fired up. It went down to 1.36 million. That's a huge change for a city to make in a single year like that. In 21, it's down to 742. In 22, it's down to 446. So what it tells you is not that there's no money, it's that there's no plan. And if we don't make a plan, there's no way to apply any money to it. And so if the Park and Rec went through a similar exercise with Emily, and they said, well, the one thing that we want to do is restore summer recreation programs in a way that doesn't have the city hiring the staff to implement them, that is a way for the council then to budget money to refire that piece of the pie. The Arts Council is going to have to come up with something similar, because I can tell you the money is there. It's just that there's not a lot of staff to come up with the idea for us. And there's probably no staff to implement it. So the idea needs to be creative, like what the Parks Council is doing, and basically saying the third party is going to create it. We're not going to create the program and then do the advertising, and no, third party, you do all of that. If we could, one of the things that I heard from Sarah, she said, I have new responsibilities and they're being defined. And a lot of my time will go to my new responsibilities. So we don't have a full-time staff position supporting us. We should, as an Arts Council, be looking at what did the full-time staff person do that was essential to us doing our programming. And then if we're smart, we can try and find a way that delivers that in an alternate way, which doesn't have us going out and just finding another Sarah, because that's not necessarily in the cards, but if we could push that to a third party, or if we could push that to an outsourced legal firm, if it's reviewing contracts, whatever it is, if our goal is to restore programming, we're gonna need to find another way to do it, a different new creative way of doing it that we haven't done before. I think that is a good place for the Art Council to kind of think about how do you move forward and restore the budget, because you're not gonna do anything without having somebody contracting with artists to do what they do. And we've kind of lost that in Sarah stepping back.
Well, Salim, I really appreciate how you're framing this. And I think maybe where a little bit of the misunderstanding is coming from the messaging from the outset. I think that what a lot of us are hearing, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, is, hey, you know, you don't have Sarah anymore. Her resources are limited. Hey, you don't have a budget anymore. Here's all your constraints. What are you going to do? And I really appreciate the way you're framing it, in that there are possibilities. We can have some money for you. Now, how can we define? I think let's define the problem first. The problem is we're starting from scratch. We have an arts council. We have a community that I personally think has a dire need for some inspiration right now. I mean, that's like beyond, like, goes without saying, right? I mean, we can be here as the arts council to give our community a little boost through these terrible times. So let's start the conversation around what do we see? Let's go round robin and say, what do you think would be a good, reasonable first step that we can do, like fairly reasonably soon, without being bogged down by all these procedural process planning steps that we can give to our community to help? And then, you know, quickly ask the council, can we have a little bit of this money to provide this? I mean, I think what George Lee did in the creative consultancy was a fabulous, it's like perfectly on point. It's in our sculpture garden. It's a beautifully well-messaged piece of artwork that's very timely and it's interactive. I've been there a number of times where people are putting their dog leashes on the hands. They're taking pictures, they're getting enjoyment out of it. That's something that's bringing some life to our community. And I mean, thankfully we were able to fill that, but that process has taken years to get him to provide something to us. So I think, could we do something where we are like paring down the process so that we can provide something a little more with a streamlined, maybe that's just not possible in a city function. I don't know.
I have to say that from a numbers perspective, Music in the Park is the number one highlight of the Arts Council. That's what the citizens, I think, have responded to.
They love it. And there's so much potential there for the summer, right? I mean, we could do something possibly distanced. We can bring some great groups in. I think that starting from something like as simple as that, Music in the Park could have some great potential in this setting that we're in right now. Let's just plan something around that instead of going down this like very, I don't know, I feel like it's a very heavy, burdensome process where we're trying to redefine our major principles. I mean, we don't need to, do we really need to actually like redefine the Arts Council right now? Not necessarily.
Again, I don't think
It's going to evolve.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the goal of this process, Erin, and I'm sorry that it's, you know, we haven't communicated that properly. Salim totally said it, like we're at the bottom of the elevator, how do we work up? But you also have to recognize that, you know, the Arts Council has been in existence since 1985. That's almost 40 years of ongoing programming and all sorts of activities. And yes, you have these guiding principles, but did everything that you offer map back to those guiding principles? I don't know. Is now a good time to maybe figure some of that out because we're in a situation where we have to completely reset? maybe it is. I mean, I agree with you that, that's why there's sort of an immediate action plan element of this and a long-term plan element of this. I don't think it's one or the other. And maybe we're kind of, going about this in a backwards way or something. Like, we definitely want to get to the immediate action plan element, but there's still that long-term, how do you build back up from the foundation because the house has been torn down, So I think that we're on the same page about kind of what can we get to the community feasibly and safely in a way that will, inspire and engage, but also show that the Arts Council is still here and ready to help
Right.
and
I
has
understand.
yeah. So I just
I'm
don't
with
want
you
you
there,
to,
but
yeah.
realistically, if we're going to like go through this process until April, present something to council by April, we're not gonna be able to do a music in the park for the summer. I mean, that process of organizing something like that, I don't think that is feasible to start something in April. I don't know. I've never been as involved in that planning process, but
Yeah, and
it's just wondering if there's a way to streamline this process right now, if we want to actually remember, we have done nothing for a year. So people are ready to jump in and do something for the community and not necessarily spend a lot of time doing this planning when we have done a lot of parks planning, comp planning in the past years. I understand the pandemic has temporarily changed our objectives, but I don't think it necessarily has to change our foundation.
Meha, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I think I agree with Erin that it's not about discussing our principles, but I think we should start working backwards from what the problems our community is facing, and just start from there. I think that'll simplify everything. And I think one of the members did bring up the survey that was done last year that had a lot of good data on what community needs. Some of the examples that come to my mind, and obviously they might not be as broad or as big, is, in the summer we could have like local artists come and teach kids in the park, we could have music in the park, but like not so many people because it's pandemic. We could have like artists come and do some murals or sculpture at this time, when there's not that many people. We could do those kind of things. We could also offer free art education, because everything is on Zoom right now. I don't think we have any partnership with any of the local arts organizations. So maybe it is the time to do that. So maybe really focusing on what our core value added offerings could be at this time, versus, just going over, what our ordinance is. I think that would be really beneficial. And I think to Salim's point, I think once we come up with all these ideas, then maybe Salim or, the council can tell us, okay, yes, we can give budget to this, and this, and maybe not that. That's just my idea.
Thank you.
Suzanne, you have your hand up. Do you have comments or questions?
Yeah, I would. I do. It goes back to my last comment. I agree with just coming up with one or two things that we feel are realistic to complete in the next year. And I appreciate Salim's information that there could be budget for these items. You guys know I've always pushed for a winter lights festival type thing. And I noticed we don't have that opportunity to communicate by text here. I would love to share a link with you about light festival and artists. There's a lot of light type artists in Seattle area, and there's a number of these light festivals. A number have gone on in 2020, in August, September, December, in our local area. So I think we have some examples of some opportunity there. That's a very social distanced opportunity, and bring something really exciting to a community that's safe and possible. So I think we could definitely take our time and brainstorm a couple things. I mean, I love the music in the park. I think you could take hula hoops and space them out in Mercerdale Park and tell people they have to be inside the hula hoop or whatever. I mean, just in itself, it would be an art thing. So I think we can come up with a couple of events that are reasonable to implement. And then the other thing I'd like to say, that I think for longer term, to Eric's point, I think it's a real opportunity to take our volunteer capital and do something with our 1% for the arts budget. You know, that's always getting kind of swept aside, like we don't want to deal with it. But isn't now a really great I mean, taking that capital budget, which seems to be about 150,000, and doing something aspirational and magnificent for our town, it's certainly COVID appropriate, or pandemic appropriate. We have the people on this commission that are kind of hungry to do something exciting and aspirational. I think that's what I would be excited to get the community behind and get them excited about a major project. And so that brings me back to Salim again. Where are we with Sound Transit? And are there opportunities in these plazas to tie in those two Sound Transit plazas to our sculpture garden? And is there an opportunity, or is this a time to do some major planning, both by the arts community, the Arts Council, and bringing in the greater community to say how we want to tie this whole transit gallery and art gallery into our town center?
Yeah. So, it's a good question. And we had a bit of Sound Transit's ear when there was the discussion about the Primavera and the bus intercept potentially moving that. Remember the discussions back in the day? I think there's an opportunity to engage with them, but it would be through CPD, and we're right now in litigation with Sound Transit, so it's not the best environment to be engaging in how to spend money that may or may not exist. So I'd say
we have the money, we have the art. I'm talking about if you gave us, or if city council said, okay, you have to stay between this sidewalk and that sidewalk. I mean, this is your boundaries, your physical boundaries you're working in. And eventually we know Sound Transit's going to open up. I mean, their sidewalks are going to tie into our sidewalks, you might say. I mean, you could give us some boundaries that we could work with.
I understand. I would say this is not the time for that, simply because we're in litigation over the very thing that you're talking about, the built environment. Like, we don't know where the curbs are, where the curb cuts are, where the bus operations are. There's a lot of things that are being discussed right now that keep that in a state of flux, that will make it very difficult to do what you're suggesting, which is begin a capital program that needs certainty of where would you put the art and who would pay for it.
Well, we have the budget, right? We have the 1% per art budget at 150,000.
I understand.
I mean, I guess we could say stay out of that area, and we could look at Mercerdale or someplace else. Maybe the community could help us decide where they feel that they want an aspirational piece of art.
I agree with you. I think you're better off staying away from Sound Transit for the moment. But I'm going to go back to Sarah, and I'm going to say, look, Sarah, you can hear there's passion in delivering something. If it's a service, if it's an event, if it's a piece of art. What I'm drawing back to is your limited ability to support the organization. If we wanted to do music in the park, what is it that has to be done that you don't have time to do that needs to be done? And then how can it be done by somebody other than you?
Can I jump in there while we're on this topic of community excitement for something great? I think this is also a good opportunity for us to really apply that that aspiration we had of partnering with organizations and really keep our ears to the ground on what's going on in the community but beyond our arts council, right? I mean, I'm on a number of PTA committees, and there's going to be a group that's going to be very passionate and very excited about revamping the Mercerdale playground. So that I found the PTA and MIPA has a way of really organizing and inspiring people on the island. And if we can sort of piggyback on some of these other organizations on the island to help with not only volunteer time, but funding, we could provide maybe an art element to this new revamp that people are exploring. And
we can, and I want to make a distinction because it's an important one. The playground at Mercerdale is part of a capital program that has a capital program manager assigned to it. And so there's a staff resource to shepherd that bigger capital project along. Well, I'm asking Sarah specifically because we're losing staff resources, right? There's a pullback. And we know that we as an arts council couldn't do anything without a contract. Just an example. We want to have music in the car, got to have a contract with the artist. And what does it require to do that moving forward with your limited staff time? Are you going to be able to do that for us? And if you can, is it just art music in the park and no more? You know, you couldn't do Shakespeare in the Park, music in the park, and, you know, something else. Like, I just don't know. I need to hear from you.
Yeah, so I would say that the reason you all had a full-time arts and culture coordinator was because you needed the staff resource to coordinate all of those things, mostly music in the park, for instance. And in the iteration we got to, in 2019, planning started in September of 2018 with some committee members assisting with it, but it was largely staff driven to do all of the coordinating, contracting, added additional summer staff to assist with setting up every week, all of the promotion and, coordinating partnerships like with the student run radio station and all of that. So, everyone here understands, I know you all understand that there's a huge staff component to this, and some of that could be filled by a volunteer capacity. Some of it could be filled by, hiring a contractor for the summer or hiring, a part-time gallery attendant when the community center reopens to keep the gallery going. But there's a big staff component to everything that you all have produced. So that's part of the reason I think we're trying to get these ideas out there, again, is to identify what are the resources that would need to happen. Now, I will say, a lot of the work that I have done over the last year has been to support businesses in the town center who have been extremely impacted by COVID-19. So, part of the reason I pivoted, to be honest, I pivoted the work that George Lee was doing because we had a resource available. We had an artist who wanted to work with our community and wanted to help out, and we had funding for culture. And so I identified the need and a way to make that happen to still have an arts component. There could be a way to do that with some of what you all are talking about. If you decided that mostly music in the park or some sort of summer Mercerdale activation that was healthy and socially distanced, knowing that it needed to be flexible and could change if the hammer comes back down with COVID restrictions, because we're still not out of this, like there would be a staff element to that, but you could make the case that it's in support of activating town center and, get local businesses involved, have businesses come out and be part of the event and everything. So, and that ties back to the creativity element, nothing that you all did in 2019, you're not going to be able to do any of that the same way in 2021 and 22. And I know everybody knows that, like that's just sort of repeating the obvious, but there's creative ways to get things done. And it's more, again, like getting back to the priority. If in a summer event is the priority to the Arts Council, one concert in the park or one something in the park that brings people together, then you all should walk away from tonight saying that's our priority, and we'll figure out a plan around that. But I just, the
But what I want
resources.
to, what I really want to punctuate, what I want to punctuate for the rest of the Arts Council is that with the drawdown of the staff with you, there's going to be a constraint on what can be delivered. Less can be delivered because there is a certain amount of staff touch points. If the council wants to be sustainable in terms of the level of programming, we're going to have to find an alternate way to deliver the programming that doesn't have the same staff input. And so if that's like concert in a box, Shakespeare in a box, dance night in a box, where we find a way to say to the city manager, you stroke a check for $5,000, you sign one contract, and what it gets you is project management, it gets you all the advertising, it gets you all the promotion, gets you set up, clean up, tear down. It's a turnkey solution. Then you can hope to keep the level of programming that you have. But otherwise, it's going to be this bottleneck where we're always kind of pushed by the city staff to say, we can't do this many events because we don't have the staff hours to support it. If we can make that pivot now and find an alternate way to deliver these, you could call them projects, you can call them events, whatever you want, but now is a really good time to do that. And the reason I say that is we could actually grow the Arts Council budget because it doesn't have the staff element anymore. There's less money going into staff support, which means more money could go into programming. And if we can find a way to drive the cost of administration down, you might get more events out of it. But now is really the time to think about that.
Well, I think that's a great thing to think about. I think that's a really interesting concept and something that's worth exploring more. What I was trying to say before is to look and maybe identify ways to fill those gaps that we're having by doing better with partnering with organizations that do have the resources, such as PTA, MIPA, and helping complement their work with ours. So we're identifying where the community is excited or where their interest lies, and then supporting that. And in that way, we get the support we need to help make things happen. And I think building a way to be better about that would be helpful going forward and sustaining programming and projects as well.
So Sarah, we're past the 8:30 mark. I think I'd like to propose that we do a huddle with chair at some point in the near future following this meeting and talk about how to structure the next conversation, which is still, I think, needing to be focused on what can we deliver as part of the immediate action plan, and some thoughts on how. So we may need to continue to find a way to collate those ideas. And then furthermore, we've got to continue the conversation on how to work a little differently into the future, how to prioritize and work a little bit differently. Because it's going to take some time to build back. Sound good?
I think that's a good place to stop.
Okay. All right. So we will be back in touch with Arts Council members shortly to talk about when we will next meet and what that will look like. There may also be a possibility that we would send something out to try to gather your input individually in between those meetings and then try to collate it. That was part of our intent between the 13th and today. Didn't happen, would have been helpful. So we will see if that might be the way to proceed. Thank all of you for your time and your energy. and we'll continue to make some progress.
Thank you, Emily. So we have a couple of other items of business that we just needed to attend to. There, I like that view so much better. That's helpful to be able to see that everyone's there and listening. The MyVol donation, just while we're all together, we wanted to get a quick sense of if people have had time to look at the options in person or otherwise, and if people have a sense of like a really strong opinion of what the decision is that they would want to make. Can we just like go do a round robin and let me know, because probably at the next meeting we'll make a decision on that. Suzanne, have you had a chance?
Yeah, I looked at it. I like the one that was the crow.
Okay.
Thanks.
And Amenha?
No, I did not, but I'll look after this meeting.
Okay. Amy?
I have a soft spot for the Dark Raven because some of the first pieces of art I saw of Ron's was a collection of 5 different ravens. So that would be my choice.
Awesome. Eric?
I'll second that. I like the Raven one as well.
Gayleen?
Sounds good to me.
It's funny, just quickly, that I thought I would be like the minority for loving the Raven, but it sounds like everyone really likes that one. So we will return to that discussion at the next meeting, and just if you have not taken a look, just take a look so that we can make a choice. And finally, we need to review and potentially amend the meeting schedule for 2021. So Sarah, do you want to lead this really quick?
Yeah, just really quickly, and maybe this is something we get to in the next meeting. So we've been asked by the city manager's office to potentially reduce board and commission meetings this year, just from a staff capacity point. We keep coming back to that. Obviously, with the timeline that Emily outlined, trying to get to April to present some ideas, I imagine the Arts Council meeting schedule will still be fairly front loaded. So I guess what I will propose tonight is that we plan to continue meeting, meet in February and meet in March, and then at March we can evaluate kind of the needs based on where we're at with planning and everyone's availability and interest in continuing forward with either a monthly schedule or a bi-monthly or as needed. I guess the only kind of edit to that is that we had planned on hosting the regular, at the next regular meeting on February 10th, bringing Emily back for another conversation related to this reset planning. She is unavailable, so it sent around some other times that she could meet. It sounded like February 23rd worked for a few people who I'd heard back from, so I just wanted to see if February 23rd for another arts reset conversation can work for everyone on this call. Just maybe a thumbs up if you're okay with that. Okay. And then I guess on top, okay, great. Thank you, Erin. And then on top of that, even though this would put 2 meetings in February, we have some other business to discuss, the MyVol discussion. I have some other updates on public art. Do you all want to keep your February 10th meeting date? And we could, do a quick check-in on a couple of items that are outstanding from your December meeting, and maybe, answer any lingering questions or ideas or needs from tonight in anticipation for that conversation on the 23rd. Maybe just another quick thumbs up if you want to keep the February 10th date as well.
It'd be a good idea.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Thank you all for putting in your time tonight. I know this is I know everybody has a lot going on and still want to get more to the conversation about your availability and interest in moving projects forward or coming up with projects and moving them forward. I agree wholeheartedly that now is the time to put arts and culture front and center to inspire the community and, galvanize support for your future work. So that's why I personally emphasize a plan so much, is thinking, what can we do now to get you all where you want to be or where you want to go. So that's really where I'm at. But thank you so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So at this time, is there anything else, any other business or items to discuss or report from the board? Seeing none, I would just like to encourage everybody, and I know this is a really, really hard time to connect with people because we're either doing it this way or, this is it. Like, we're not like seeing people in person or running into people in the grocery store like we used to, or at gatherings or getting together for drinks. But in whatever way you can, try to remember that you're always listening in for what the community is needing and wanting right now. For me, it's really being involved with the PTA, and I'm on many meetings for that, and try to relate what we do and what we want to do for the community to everything that you're doing right now, so that you can piece that together and be helpful, I guess. I don't know. So that's all I have. But I'm glad that we're getting back together more regularly now. I think we have good things ahead. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.